All right, so would someone go ahead and begin by reading the introduction where it says Luke's Sermon on the Plain, which we are not focusing on today. Okay, let's see, Addie, go ahead and start us off there. Luke's Sermon on the Plain. Okay, all right, so we actually are going to talk about both the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain. Now, do you remember last year when we did our unit on the four evangelists, and we talked about how different some of their writings are based on who their audience was? In fact, we talked about that a lot last year. Each gospel writer, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, had a particular group of people that they targeted their stories for. So while their stories are very similar in many ways, they're different in other ways because of the audience they had. And this is definitely true with Matthew and Luke. So we're going to be looking at the Sermon on the Mount today, which is written by Matthew and has very much a Jewish audience, okay? Jewish Christians. So a lot of the things that are in this sermon are designed for them, whereas Luke was writing to Gentiles, and we'll talk more a little bit later about how his sermon is described, okay? The very first thing you'll notice is that in Matthew's sermon, it's on a mount, okay, or a large hill. We'll talk more about the actual features of the location later. Now, why do you think Matthew would have Jesus giving his sermon on a mount or a hill, okay, and Luke would have Jesus giving his sermon on a plain? You know, if someone was trying to, analyze this event like an objective news person, they'd say, well, which was it? Was it on top of a hill? Was it on a low, flat plain? Okay, why is there a difference? Matthew tells his story about Jesus being up on a hill or a mountain for a reason. Why do you think he might have done that? What's significant about having someone like Jesus go up on top of a land feature? See, John?
Is it because he's sort of at the top of, sort of like the leader, so he's like at the top of the...
Okay, well, it certainly does establish a type of authority, okay, when you're above the people, all right? What kind of, who else in the Bible do you think of having authority and kind of like being above the people and speaking to them? Like an actual person. Yeah, it sounds a lot like Moses, okay? Going back to the Old Testament, going up on Mount Sinai, receiving the commandments, and then, of course, coming down and giving it to the people. So Matthew has this detail to kind of show Jesus speaks with authority, kind of like Moses would have, okay? Whereas Luke has Jesus actually on flat land with the rest of the people. Okay, let's go ahead. Here's how the sermon begins. It's contained in the 5th chapter. It says, when he saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying. Now, in the very, very beginning of the sermon, he begins with the Beatitudes. So here's a chance for you to see, and of course I know you have your Bibles in front of you, but let's see if you can remember what goes into each of the blanks, okay? Which, by the way, you should be in Matthew chapter 5 if you're not already there, okay? So New Testament. That's the first gospel and the first book of the Bible in the New Testament. So make sure you're on that page. In fact, can we get a page number for that?
16.
Okay, so 16 in the New Testament. Remember, these Bibles, they renumber the pages when they get to the New Testament. Okay, so the very first thing that Jesus said was, blessed are the blank. That would be poor in spirit, okay? For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That's the very first thing that Jesus says to them. Blessed are they who mourn, for they will be comforted. That's the second beatitude. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the land, or earth. Okay, you can use either word there. The fourth beatitude, blessed are they who blank and blank. Hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. The fifth beatitude, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Okay, again, none of this is new. Blessed are the blank. clean of heart, for they shall see God. Remember the letter C? Okay, merci, clean of heart, see God. The seventh beatitude, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. And then finally, the eighth beatitude, blessed are they who are persecuted for righteousness. Okay, remember peeper, okay, peacemakers, persecuted, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, because the reward of the first beatitude is the same for the eighth. Now, what we didn't talk about the other day is that the eighth beatitude, Jesus actually expounds upon this idea of being persecuted. He says, blessed are you when they insult you and persecute you and utter every kind of evil against you. Falsely, he makes clear, okay, because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward will be great in heaven. Thus they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So Jesus, in the very beginning, tells his followers, it's not going to be an easy road to follow me. You will suffer. People will persecute you. But happy are those people, blessed are those who are willing to do that. Okay? So again, that's part of the Beatitudes, is having that ability to stand up for what is right. Okay? All right, now, at this point, after he introduces the Beatitudes, he goes into his sermon, which involves a number of analogies, metaphors. He uses some allegory, and some of these things are kind of, I won't say the word haphazardly placed, but we're going to be jumping around a little bit. But these are all things that Jesus is preaching to his audience. Okay? All right, so let's start first with the similes of salt and light. I think a lot of what we're going to encounter in this sermon you've heard before. Okay? So he says, you are the salt of the earth, but if salt loses its taste, what can it be seasoned? It is no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city set on a mountain cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and then put it under a bushel basket. It is set on a lampstand where it gives light to all the house. Just so, your light must shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your heavenly Father. All right? So, just from that paragraph that I read, that is in your outline, any phrases that sound familiar to you? The answer would be yes. What's one of the things in that paragraph that you've heard before? See, Lizzie? Yeah, you're the light of the world. How often do we hear or talk about that? This is where Jesus used that phrase, okay? You, my followers, are the light of the world. Now, look at the metaphor here. He says you're the light of the world. You're a lamp, but what do you do with a lamp? You place it on a table or somewhere where it can light up the room, all right? You don't put it under a bushel basket. No, right? Like the song, okay? And don't let Satan blow it out, okay? Because you're the light of the world. So he's pointing out that you are my followers. You need to live the message and share the message with the world, okay? Don't hide it. Share it, okay? Now, so I think that metaphor of light, obviously light representing goodness and truth, but the other one, the salt, he says you are the salt of the earth, okay? Why do you think, that's kind of a weird thing to be called, you're salt, all right? What does that mean? Why do you think Jesus would use that phrase? It's very similar to being the light, okay? See, John?
Maybe because salt dissolves and then goes away, so that's dissolving on everything.
Well, I guess in a scientific sense that is true, okay? Does salt have any value? Does salt have value? Yeah, I mean, even if you don't actually maybe put it on your food, even though some people do obviously cook with salt, salt is actually a very useful thing, all right? In Jesus' time, salt was even more valuable, okay? Because back in those days, the only thing that made food have any taste whatsoever was salt. Salt also was used to preserve food, and they didn't have refrigerators like we do, or freezers. So salt actually was used as a preservative. So it was very valuable. In fact, in ancient Roman times, Roman soldiers were paid for their service in the army partly with salt. Okay? In fact, the word sal in Latin is where we get our word salary. If you earn a salary, well, Roman soldiers earned a salary, and part of their pay, I mean, they did get some money, but they were given salt to flavor their awful tasting food. Okay, and I can imagine it probably was pretty bad. So the bottom line here is Jesus saying, you're valuable. You're like salt. Okay, but what good is salt if it loses its taste? So in other words, remain faithful so you don't lose your value. Okay, don't let your light be put out or hidden under the table, because then what's the point? Okay, so he starts with that really powerful metaphor. Okay, let's keep going here. He goes on to talk about the law. What did Jesus say about abolishing the law or the prophets? Verse 17. We had a unit titled after this last year in 7th grade. Matthew 5:17. Who's got it? 5:17. Anna. Okay, good. Let's take the first part of that. I have not come to abolish the law or prophets. That's what you need to have in the blank there. I have not come to abolish the law or the prophets. Now, we talked about this last year in 7th grade. Of course, not that you would remember back that far, but we talked about how, when Jesus started preaching, he was criticized by his opponents of being someone who was there to undo all of the laws and traditions of their ancestors. He was going to blow things up, and he was this radical. And Jesus was trying to say in this sermon, no, I'm not here to blow things up. I'm not here to reject the past. In fact, if anything, I'm here to make the teachings and the traditions that we've been given from our ancestors real. Okay? So that was what he was saying as well. Okay? All right, turn to the next page as we go through our outline. In fact, he says anyone who breaks one of these laws and teaches others to do so will be called and this is verse 19. What's the missing word here? I hear somebody murmuring it. Yeah, you'll be the least in the kingdom of heaven. Okay? The least in the kingdom of heaven. Not the greatest, the least. He goes on to say, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the blank and blank, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. We're missing two words there. This is chapter 5, verse 20. Gavin. The scribes and the Pharisees. Scribes and Pharisees. Now, how many times do we hear those two groups of people paired together in the New Testament? A lot. That'd be a good way to put it, okay? Jesus talks about them almost all the time. Scribes and Pharisees. And usually when he does, what's the context of it? Is he showering praise upon them? No, usually not. Okay? The scribes and Pharisees, who were kind of like the religious leaders of the day, he usually describes them as being kind of hypocritical, and which we're going to see later in the sermon, and not worthy to emulate or follow. But here he says, you better be at least as good as them, and even better. Okay? You got to at least be as good as them, and observant of the law, and even a little bit better. Okay? All right, so let's keep going in the outline here. This next section, in fact, the next several paragraphs are all teachings about different things. Now, in this part of the sermon, biblical scholars have detected, and it's quite easy to do this, there's a pattern, there's a structure to how Jesus presents this next part of his sermon. And these are referred to sometimes as the antithesis. And it's because they are opposed to each other. He's going to be doing comparisons, talking about a topic and giving you kind of the two ends of it. Okay? So he uses the phrase, you have heard that it was said, you shall not kill. Now what is he quoting there? He's quoting a commandment. Okay? He's going to be doing that for the next several parts of the sermon here. He's going to start with a commandment, and he's going to say, okay, you've been taught that, but I say to you, so in this case he says, you shall not kill, but I say to you, whoever is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. And whoever says, raka, do you see that word in there? In bold print, raka?
Yes.
Okay, does anyone know what raka means? Probably not, because it's Aramaic. Okay? And now, if you looked at your little footnotes, remember these New American Bibles are annotated, I believe it says that raka was an Aramaic word that meant like worthless or idiot. Okay, it was a put down. Okay, raka was a put down. And he says that if you say that word against somebody that you are not happy with, you will be answerable to the Sanhedrin. And it says, whoever says, you fool, will be liable to, in verse 22, here's an interesting phrase that appears. It says, well, actually, in verse 22, he talks about fiery Gehenna. That's what I want you to write down there. Okay? It is a judgment, but fiery Gehenna. Now, have any of you ever heard of Gehenna? No? Okay. Well, it appears in the New Testament, I don't know how many times, but it does appear multiple times. The fiery part kind of gives you this image of, go ahead and say it. In the Bible, when they talk about fiery place, it's supposed to be a type of hell, okay? And Gehenna sometimes is a replacement word for that. Now, there is a little bit of a history behind that. Gehenna was actually a location right outside of Jerusalem, okay? It was kind of known as being kind of a garbage dump. It was a place where people put refuse and, waste. It would kind of be like a landfill today, all right? It was really a nasty place. So when Jesus talked about fiery Gehenna, it was kind of like a reference to kind of like a dump, all right? Somewhere where you would not want to be located, okay? And in this case, just talking bad to other people, calling someone, verbally calling them something could put you into this really bad situation. All right, so he says, therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and your brother has anything against you, go first and be, verse 24, reconciled with him. Okay? Reconciled. In other words, go and ask for forgiveness. If you're angry with somebody, before you go to the temple or you go to offer up something to God or to pray, go and make sure that nobody's angry at you and that you're not angry at them. He says also, settle with your opponent quickly while on the way to court with him. Otherwise, they will, verse 25. Let's see, Addie. Yeah, they'll hand you over and you'll be thrown into prison. Hand you over and you'll be thrown into prison. So Jesus starts with the commandment that says, thou shalt not kill. And he's saying, you've been told that, and of course, no, you shouldn't kill somebody. But I'm telling you that if you're even angry with a person and you verbally assault somebody and you have these grudges and you have enemies everywhere, you're just as in bad shape. Okay? So it's like make peace, going back to one of the Beatitudes, with other people, or you'll suffer the consequences. So this is kind of a warning. Okay? All right, teaching about adultery. We'll go into the next section. He begins with that phrase, you have heard it was said, you shall not commit adultery. There's another commandment being cited. But I say to you, everyone, does it say everyone? Okay, everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Okay? So he starts by saying, obviously, the act of adultery of someone cheating on their spouse with another person, that would be definitely wrong. But he says, if you even have like the thoughts in your mind of doing that it's just as bad. Okay? Now, look at this one. He says, if your right eye causes you to sin, in verse 29, tear it out. Ouch. Tear it out. Better this than to have your whole body thrown into Gehenna. There's that word again. And if your right hand causes you to sin, verse 30, it says cut it off. Okay? Better than this than to have your whole body to go into Gehenna. Okay? All right, now here's one of the parts of the sermon that you definitely don't want to read literally. Okay? Perhaps if you did, you would probably end up looking like a pirate, right? You rip out an eye, you got to put an eye patch on. You cut off a hand, you're going to have to end up with a hook. All right? Eye patch and a hook with a parrot on your shoulder, you're a pirate, right? Okay? Jesus says avoid that. All right? Now, what is he talking about? Obviously, this is in jest. He's not really saying rip your eye out, cut your hand off, cut your leg off. What's he really saying? What's he really saying here? See, Addie? Okay, well, he starts by talking adultery, about the sin of adultery, okay? And then he starts talking about, something that causes you to sin. Get rid of it, okay? So whatever it might be, he's saying it is better to get that thing out of your life than to allow it to cause you to sin. So while he's not saying to actually start removing body parts, he is saying that if there's something in your life that you know is leading you into temptation, it'd be better to get rid of that thing than to, be led into sin, because the penalty and what you will lose from that is great. Okay, it was also said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a bill of divorce. He is citing the Mosaic law of the Old Testament. Okay, in the days of Moses, that was the law the Jewish people were given, is that if a man wanted to divorce his wife, all he had to do was to simply give her a note and say, the marriage is dissolved. Okay? Well, Jesus is saying, that might be what you've been taught, but here's what I say to you. Whoever divorces his wife, unless, notice there is a qualification here, verse 32, the marriage is unlawful, causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Okay? Now, in the Old Testament, the Jewish people, again, in the law of Moses, they had very specific laws about marriage and what was required for a man and a woman to be able to get married. Okay? If there was something that wasn't quite right, they would say the marriage was unlawful. So Jesus is saying that unless that's the case, a man who marries a woman should not divorce her. Now, Moses had told them that they could, but Jesus is saying, I'm telling you, you shouldn't. Okay? Even though the law might have said you can, you shouldn't. And he puts that into the category of adultery. Okay? Which is a teaching of the church. If you remember, we talked about how the church's doctrine teaching about divorce is based upon this reading in Matthew's Gospel. All right, let's go on here. Teaching about oaths. Again, you have heard it was said, do not take a false oath. But I say to you, do not swear at all, not by heaven, for it is God's blank, verse 34, throne, nor by earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Let your blank mean blank, and your blank mean blank.
Yes, yes, no, no.
Yeah, let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. So what Jesus is saying here is that you should be honest and trustworthy enough that you should not need to take an oath, okay? You should not need to say, oh, I swear, I'm going to pay back the money, or I swear I'm telling the truth. Jesus is saying, well, you shouldn't even need to do that. You should be trustworthy enough that when you say yes, someone knows that your yes means yes. And when you say no, that they know that you're telling the truth. Okay? So Jesus is emphasizing that. All right, retaliation and love of enemies. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, offer no resistance to one who is evil. Now, how many of you have heard of that phrase before, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth? Okay? It is in the Bible. In fact, it's part of the law of Moses. Okay? It's also contained in the old Babylonian law. Did you guys study ancient Mesopotamia in 6th grade? Kind of? Okay, well, I know that was 2 years ago. So you probably know that the Babylonians were known for having a very harsh law code. But that eye for an eye basically said that if someone does something to somebody else, the law allows that person to do that back to them. Okay? So, if somebody knocks somebody's eye out, well, you get to knock their eye out. If they knock your tooth out, you get to knock their tooth out. If they knock 2 teeth out, you get 2 teeth. Okay? Now, it was actually designed in ancient societies to be fair. The idea was equal punishment for the crime. But Jesus is saying that's not the way you should go about it. Okay? He says, offer no resistance to one who is evil. When someone strikes your right cheek, verse 39, it says turn and offer the left. Okay? You've probably heard that phrase, turn the other cheek. Okay, well, this is where it appears in the Bible. Okay? If anyone should press you into service for 1 mile, go with him for 2 miles. Turn and offer the other. This is the turn the other cheek thing. Okay? Give to one who asks you, and do not turn your back on one who wants to borrow. So it says that if someone asks you for something, give it to them, and don't worry about getting it back. Does that sound familiar to you? It's in the Didache, that's right. In fact, there's a whole bunch of things that are in this sermon that appear in the Didache. If you remember when we were looking, well, actually, you guys didn't get to look at the actual Didache, but we talked about how there's a lot of Matthew language that appears in that ancient catechism. So here we are right here. Now, this is radical, okay? Because, we are conditioned that, if someone does us bad, especially physically, if somebody tries to harm you, you immediately retaliate, okay? And here's Jesus saying, no, okay? Don't do that. Now, we do not take this as meaning you can't defend yourself, okay? And, the church teaches that people have a right to self-defense. But Jesus is talking again about an attitude that is less retaliatory and less, I'm going to get revenge on my enemy, of trying to forgive. That's why he's talking about that, okay? All right, he says, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say to you, love your enemies and blank for those who persecute you. Pray for them. Pray for them. That's verse 44.
How many models? Two.
Yeah, so if someone asks you to go a mile with them, go 2. Okay? All right, if you love those who love you, what recompense do you have? Do not blank do the same? Do not tax collectors do the same? Be perfect just as your heavenly Father is perfect. Okay? So what he's saying here is that, it's easy to love people who are good to you. And if you think about that, that's very true. Of course we love it when people, compliment us and are kind to us. It's easy to be friendly back to them. But what about the person that criticizes us and doesn't think like we do and maybe even, criticizes us directly? It's like, how can you be friendly with them? What Jesus is saying, try, okay? All right, let's go down to chapter 6. Take care not to perform righteous deeds in order that people may see them. Otherwise, you may have no reward from your heavenly Father. Do not do as the hypocrites do. And here's this section that we're about to go into in the sermon. He uses that word hypocrite quite a bit. Okay? All right, so we're in chapter 6 now. The hypocrites do in the blank, verse 2, in the synagogues. In the synagogues. Okay, everyone see where we are now? Chapter 6, verse 2. He says, when you give alms, do not let your blank hand know what your blank is doing. I think is it left? It's left and right. Do not let your left hand know what your right is doing. And your Father who sees in secret will repay you. Now that phrasing, don't let your left know what your right is doing, he's talking about being charitable, but not doing it to get other people's attention. Okay? In other words, when the basket gets passed, which I know we haven't been passing the basket at church since COVID, but when the basket gets passed, don't whip out a big $50 bill and go, oh, yeah, I got to get this $50 bill in that basket. I want everybody to see how much I'm putting in there, okay? You should put it in there the same way as if you were just putting $1, okay? Not with a bunch of pride and, hey, look at me, look at what I'm giving. You just give it, and then you're quiet about it, okay? That's what Jesus is talking about. Because what do the scribes and Pharisees do? Maybe they do give money to the temple. But why do they do it? So their reputation is, oh, look at me. Look at all what I give. Okay, look at how wonderful I am. Jesus is saying, don't be like them. Okay, don't be like them. All right, also, when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites who love to stand and pray in the synagogues, same answer as verse 2, and the street corners so that others may see them. When you pray, it says in verse 6, go to your inner room and pray to your Father in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will repay you. Does anybody have an inner room in their house? I'm just curious. Like a room that you could go into and like nobody would know you're in there?
No.
Okay. Well, Jesus is talking about, again, don't go out and be praying so that other people can see you. Okay? Do your prayer in the silent, of your own heart and your own mind, and don't worry that people know that you're praying. Okay? Because who is the most important person to know that you're praying? That's God. Okay? So now it's not saying that you can't publicly pray, all right? But it's saying here that you shouldn't be doing it just to get positive attention from people. Okay? And there are people that do that.
What do you want in the blank?
Which one?
6:6.
Go to your inner room.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? Yeah, go to your inner room and pull the shades and, in the darkness of this little closet, pray to God. Okay. All right, let's keep going here. The Lord's Prayer is mentioned. This is how you are to pray, Jesus says. Our Father in heaven, hallowed, I think it should be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors, and do not subject us to the final test, but deliver us from the evil one. Does that sound familiar? It sounds a lot like the Our Father. In fact, that in essence is what it is. Okay, he's talking about the Lord's Prayer. And this is where in the Bible Jesus teaches the Lord's Prayer. Okay? All right, teaching about fasting. When you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites. They neglect their appearance so they may appear to others to be fasting. Amen, I say that you have received, they have received their reward. But when you fast, in verse 17, anoint your head and face, so that you may not appear to be fasting except to your Father who is in heaven. So, fasting means to go without...
When you fast, without food.
Yeah, you go without food. You deprive yourself. Now, when do we often do this?
Fish fry.
When do we often deprive ourselves of... We do it during Lent. Okay, we do it during Lent. And of course, it's to be, an inner exercise to discipline ourselves. But it also sometimes can be kind of a way to communicate to others that, we're sharing in this deprivation. Now, I don't know about you, but I know sometimes I have to really try hard during Lent not to complain about what it is I've given up for Lent. Okay, or on a Friday when all you can have is fish, all right, and you can't eat meat, and to try to make it clear that, oh gosh, no meat today, or on the days when we fast, it's like, oh gosh, one meal, a bowl of cereal in the morning, and then a really small lunch. I'm so hungry. Do any of you during Lent complain?
Yes.
Do you ever complain so that other people can hear and feel your pain?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so Jesus says don't do that, okay? In fact, try to not let people know that you are fasting. Don't complain about it, all right? Do it for the right reason. That's what he's saying, okay? Yeah, don't complain about it. All right, treasure in heaven. Jesus says in verse 19, do not store up treasure on earth. Do not store up treasure on earth, where moth and decay destroy, and thieves break in and steal. Instead, verse 20, store up treasure in heaven. For where your blank is, treasure is, there also will be your, verse 21, heart. Okay, so let's recap this. Do not store up treasure on earth, where moth and decay destroy, and thieves break in and steal. Instead, store up treasure in heaven, for where your treasure is, there also will be your heart. Okay, has anyone ever heard that phrase before? Where your treasure is, there will also be your heart. It basically means it's like the thing that really is most valuable to you is really where your heart is. Okay? If your focus is on having money and material things and prestige, then that's who you are. Okay? That's going to guide everything that you do in your life. And Jesus is saying, don't fall into that trap. Okay? Whereas if your focus is on the spiritual, all right, that's going to be the kind of person you are. Okay? Because as we know, no matter how much money you have, or how many properties you own, or whatever, at some point, you're going to have to, you're going to die, and then all that stuff will mean nothing to you. You can't, there's an old saying, you can't take it with you. Okay? You can't take it with you. I remember reading, there was this really rich guy, or I think he was rich, but he had this really expensive sports car, and he loved his sports car, and he ended up being buried in it. Okay, like he had to have like 3 burial plots so they could have enough room to bury. I think it might have been a Ferrari or something. He literally was buried in his Ferrari. And it's like, okay, well, that was his love of his life. It's like, okay, he's buried in it, but he's not going to be able to drive it, okay, because he's dead. All right. So that's kind of a crazy example of somebody. Where was his heart? It was in the Ferrari. Okay, but he couldn't take it with him. Okay, all right, we're going to go just a little bit farther. I don't think it'd be a good idea to try to go all the way here, but let's go ahead and do. Let's finish up this next paragraph, and then we're going to stop for a little bit. Okay, all right. The lamp of the body is the blank. Verse 22. Eye. If it is sound, your whole body will be filled with light. If it is bad, your whole body will be in darkness. If the light in you is dark, how great will that darkness be? Okay, so that lamp of the body is the eye. There's an old saying, I don't know how old it is, but it says the eye is the window into the soul of a person. And of course, you can really get a lot by looking at a person in their eyes and kind of get an idea of, are they genuine or are they not genuine? And Jesus is saying, be sound in your judgment, so that, again, that people can trust you and that you have a good heart. Okay? All right, now you can see that's not the end of the sermon. There are still a couple different topics that Jesus covers in this sermon. But again, I don't want to try to cover it all because it is quite a bit. So we're going to stop there for a moment. If you could make a little mark